Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Haltom City Council. We are pleased you're here tonight, and we thank you for being interested in our city and for coming out and participating in the democratic process. Some of you in the audience are here for the first time, and we welcome you, and we want to encourage you to come back often. We're appreciative of your participation, and we're thankful for those who are watching on HCTV and who will have an opportunity to see this council meeting and participate in that way. We want to begin tonight by calling your attention to Kara White, who is our attorney in fact tonight. Our usual attorney, Mr. Olson, is ill, not able to be here. And so, Kara, welcome to the Haltom City Council meeting. So keep us on the straight and narrow. Thank you. The first thing we'll do tonight is the invocation and pledge. Councilmember Diane Bransom is the person responsible for that tonight, and I think, Councilmember Bransom, you have someone to introduce that'll be doing that.
I do. I have a special someone tonight from Troop 434, a life rank Boy Scout, John Levitt, who's going to lead us in the invocation and pledge of allegiance.
If you will, stand, please.
Okay. If you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And will you all please join me in the Our Father? And Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Thank you, and if you will be seated. And we're always pleased and honored to have Boy Scouts in our midst, and to have them participate in the in the council meeting. We'll move now to announcements and events. Ms. Burns, if you're ready, we're trying to get the monitor working. Okay.
Everybody else is too short to try and do it, so I'm trying to
Ms. Burns is our Public Information Officer, and she has a number of announcements of events that are going to be taking place in our city that our citizens need to know about. So, Ms. Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, city offices will be closed this Friday, April 14th. It's Good Friday, and it's an employee holiday. Keep Haltom City Beautiful, the public library, and Starbucks are teaming up to present a program for preschoolers on the environment. The program will be presented at 10:30 a.m. Tuesday, April 18th at the Starbucks located at 6405 Beach Street. A puppet show, story, and an appearance by Ben the Bear will be featured. There's no admission charge. And even though the Starbucks is not located in Haltom City, it's just across the street, and they were generous enough to loan us their space for the morning. The first concert in the 2006 series of Concerts in the Park will be presented at 7 p.m. Thursday, April 20th at Haltom Road Park. Singing group Forever Young will kick off the series with a performance of 50s and 60s style rock. The concert's free, and those who attend are encouraged to bring their picnic dinner, blankets, and lawn chairs. There will be a drink concession on site. The library book sale, which this year is out of this world, begins Thursday, April 20th and runs through Saturday, April 22nd. You can help support library programs by making a purchase or by volunteering to help with the sale. Please call the library at 222-7786 for hours of the sale and to volunteer. Dumpster Day, the city's annual collection of materials for disposal and recycling, will take place Saturday, April 22nd. Hours of the event are 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Residents may bring bulky items for disposal as well as brush for mulching. Metal, tires, and electronics will be collected for recycling. Proof of residency is required, and there's a limit of 1 pickup load per household. And this past weekend at the free landfill day, there were 39 households that took advantage of that event. Haltom City will participate with more than 65 cities in a warrant roundup. The roundup will begin on Monday, April 24th, and will continue through Sunday, April 30th. Those with outstanding warrants can avoid arrest by contacting the Haltom City Municipal Court prior to the start of the roundup. Those who do not clear up their existing warrants risk arrest on the spot if stopped by an officer. For information on Haltom City warrants, call the court at 222-7773. The library slogan contest is currently underway, and those interested in entering must submit their idea by deadline, which is Saturday, April 29th. The slogan chosen as a winner will be used for promotion of library programs. And that's all I have this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Burns, for that information, and all of us are better informed about important initiatives and events that will be occurring in our city. Mr. Muir, you want to,
Sure.
I think you have someone to introduce for another announcement.
Sure, David Fain's going to come up and address some mailings that we've had going out over the last little bit.
Thank you. Mayor White, members of the council, just wanted to let you know that the last few weeks, our staff has mailed out some information to property owners and other vendors in our community. And just a little bit of background, several months ago, staff presented to you a resolution for your consideration and approval for a desire to participate in the community rating system. If you recall that, the community rating system is sponsored by FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Association or agency. And it's similar to, or the community rating system is similar to perhaps the fire department, who tries to bring what's known as the key rate down to a lower number, because basically what that means is that as property owners, your insurance rates would be lowered based on a key rate. So where I'm going with this is to say that our city is actively pursuing our community rating system, or our CRS, and we are trying to lower that number. We're real high right now. So one of the processes, or one of the many steps we have to take to lower our rating, is to obviously inform our citizens of what is going on in our community as far as preventing floods in your home, or taking necessary steps to prevent floods, or real simply is to maybe even look at an option of purchasing flood insurance. With that, the city did mail out a letter and a brochure that I have here, and we mailed them out to 3 groups of folks in our community. We mailed them off, first off, to property owners that may live in the flood, have property in the floodway or floodplain, or actually have a house or a vacant lot or a business in the floodplain. So we mailed it out to that group. So if you live near or in a floodplain, you receive that letter. We also mailed them out to insurance agencies in our community, and we also mailed them out to realtors. You may be surprised, and I was somewhat surprised going through this process, is that it's not automatic that you have flood insurance on your homeowner's policy. It's not automatic. Now, some mortgage companies will require that, perhaps if you do live in the floodplain and to be able to purchase that property, be it a house or a business, it may be required that you purchase that insurance. So what I'm getting at is that we sent this brochure out to our citizens to let them know these issues that I've mentioned, among other issues like how to protect your property against the flood and that type of thing. And they're real issues in our community. As you well know, we have 2 major creeks, and I don't consider them a creek, they're a river. They are huge. And just in the last rainstorm that we had of 4 or 5 inches, it was getting real close to some residents. And they were very concerned, as we all were, especially staff. So that's basically what we have here, is just that we've mailed these out to those 3 groups that I mentioned. And if there's ever any questions about this, we do have the numbers mentioned here to call our department and we will be more than happy to address any concerns or any thing that we can walk you through concerning flooding. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I believe there are no questions. Mr. Muir, you have, yes, there is one. Councilmember Lanford.
Mr. Fain, you mentioned the last rain event we had. Did you observe any change in the flow of water through Little Fossil here, where we've been doing a lot of work down there, subject to the drainage utility work that's been done there? Were you able to observe that, and what was your assessment of has there been any change, or is it too soon? Or what?
That's a good question, Councilman. I'm glad to say that I don't know of any property that flooded as far as a home or a business. We obviously, as you know, that we do try to get out into our creeks and be aggressive in our stormwater and cleaning our creeks out and breaching any dams or any debris that's in those channels in creeks to prevent any flooding. So I'd like to say yes, hopefully that did help, because we didn't hear of any flooding of any property. So we're proud of what we've done. We need to continue it. Of course, on the east side of the Metroplex, they received 9 inches of rain, and 9 inches, I'd hate to see what would happen, but hopefully nothing critical would happen in our community.
Well, with 9 inches, you can only clean out a creek so much. 9 inches, you're going to have flooding. Despite the drainage utility, you're going to have it. So there's going to be a level of a storm that's going to, and hopefully we avoid that. So.
But with the clean out we've done in the creeks, needless to
Certainly
say,
helped.
that expedited the flow of water
Absolutely.
that had been backing up or that would have backed up to some extent.
That's correct. Like I said, we do breach dams that occur. Beavers create dams. Large trees fall, that would create a dam effect. Even our inlets, our storm inlets, we're beginning to clean those up also.
Anything else for Mr. Fain on this announcement he's made? Thank you, Mr. Fain. And we move now to a transportation initiative, and our city manager, I think, will introduce this report tonight.
Okay. Mayor and council, I've asked, let me get that away, Mr. Vic Soom, who's making his way to the mic now. He's the executive director of the Tarrant Regional Transportation Coalition, of which the city is a member. Asked Vic to kind of give the council a view of the transportation issues as it relate to the county and probably the region as a whole. I think we're all painfully aware of the city's issues with 820, Denton Highway, 121, and things of that nature. And a side note from, I think Mr. Fain's already gone, but 121 is going to be starting to be repaved. Have an overlay done on it within the next week or so. So that's some good news along 121. But Mr. Soom is going to be going over how the region is going to be what we're looking at from transportation. I'm doing this in preparation for the public meetings that are going to be starting at the end of the month with TxDOT. I want the council to have a brushstroke of what's affecting us. Vic.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate very much you all inviting me to come visit with you this evening. Each month at our Tarrant Regional Transportation Coalition meetings, I invite folks who are there to have me come out and visit with them, because one of the biggest challenges I face is sort of getting an opportunity to tell the story about transportation in our region. So in addition, I want to thank you all for your membership in the Tarrant Regional Transportation Coalition. I think by our joining together and sharing information and working together, we can be more effective. So what I have here for you today is sort of the story of regional transportation and some of the challenges we face, and some of the strategies that we're going to employ to try to deal with the challenges we face. Let's see if I can get this to, yep. To say that transportation is critical to our economy and quality of life is almost stating the obvious, but I think sometimes we take our transportation system for granted. So I always like to point that out as sort of the backdrop for this transportation story that I tell. And I think we all have a duty to inform ourselves and to learn about our transportation system. And so, again, I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this evening. In North Texas, our growth is outpacing the capacity of our current transportation system. We simply cannot sustain mobility in our region unless we increase the level of investment we make in transportation infrastructure. Let's begin by looking at the impact of transportation on our daily lives. I think one of the things we don't realize sometimes is how vital this region is to not only the state of Texas, but to the entire nation. Our region is literally a third of the Texas economy. If we don't move people and goods efficiently within and through our region, the Texas economy suffers dramatically. And of course, our region does as well. The bottom line is that increased investment in transportation infrastructure just makes good economic sense. As we go through this, you'll see some numbers that'll show you that the cost of congestion, of roadway congestion, is more than 2 times the amount that it would take for us in terms of increased investment to really deal with the problem effectively. So that's why I say that increased investment makes good economic sense. The history of our region is one of substantial and sustained growth. We've added 1 million or more people per decade for the last 40 years, and we will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Our population now exceeds 6.2 million. We're now the 5th largest region in the country. As our population increases, so does our roadway congestion and the delays that it brings. Daily vehicle miles traveled increase at a greater rate than population. Our cost of congestion today exceeds $6 billion annually. That represents a 103% increase since 1985. We already have relatively high levels of delay from roadway congestion, more so than regions like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Miami, or Boston. Only 5 regions in the country have more congestion-driven delay than we do. Our region actually experienced the greatest increase in annual delay per passenger from roadway congestion of any region in the country during the 20-year period from 1982 to 2002. This is the slide that normally gets people concerned about the issue. It illustrates the growth in the level of congestion over time. The dark red color indicates severe levels of congestion. The light red shading indicates moderate levels of congestion. These 3 snapshots in time clearly illustrate the dramatic spread of severe roadway congestion throughout our region. And if you look at the 2025 map there, you'll see that the severe congestion in the western half of the region probably encompasses a larger land area than the severe congestion in the eastern part of the region, which historically certainly hasn't been true, but it shows you where the growth is occurring and where the resulting congestion is going to be. So if you think things are bad now, just wait. Congestion levels will more than double in the next 25 years. The cost of congestion has more than doubled in the past 20 years and is expected to double again in the next 20 years. If you look at the dark red area on the 2025 map and imagine bumper-to-bumper traffic conditions on the streets throughout so much of our region, just ask yourself what life will be like when our roadways experience such high levels of congestion. What will the resulting delay mean for commerce, for commuters, for family life? Think about this. By 2025, a 20-minute drive on today's roads will take 52 minutes. Accommodating this level of growth will be a challenge. Fortunately, we have an aggressive multimodal plan that addresses the issue. In the interest of time, we'll focus on only a few elements of the plan this evening, but I want you to understand sort of the backbone of our regional transportation plan. It's important. This slide shows the freeway and tollway component of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It calls for the addition of 3,000 new lane miles, which will provide a 77% increase in capacity. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan includes recommendations for high occupancy vehicle and managed lanes. 820 will be an example of a managed lane roadway. This component of the plan calls for 600 new lane miles of HOV or managed lane facilities in 17 different corridors. Most of the highway capacity that will be added in our region will involve managed lanes with electronic tolling capabilities. This will provide some new revenue to meet some of the need for the increased financial investment. The Metropolitan Transportation Plan also includes recommendations for a rail system. It calls for adding nearly 300 miles of rail. About 50% of these new lines will be outside the existing transit service areas. Annual operating and debt service costs outside the existing transit service areas will be approximately $163 million. The Council of Governments invested nearly $1.8 million in a study that produced this rail plan. It is not just some lines arbitrarily drawn on a map. Much study went into determining where existing rail infrastructure is, where the highest potential ridership is, and what is financially feasible. So the result would be a plan that is affordable and accessible. Obviously, it's not possible to provide direct rail service to every community. That's just not affordable. But that absolutely does not mean that communities don't directly benefit from the plan. The benefit might be a nearby rail station within a short drive, or it might be the ability to drive on a less congested highway. When someone chooses to commute by train, that's one less car driving on the highway. In that sense, build-out of the regional rail plan adds more highway capacity, which benefits motorists throughout the region. The truth is, we simply don't have the ability to solve all of our problem with highways alone. We don't have the right-of-way to do so. So we must have rail as well as road improvements. Problem is, we've got to identify a revenue source to fund this added investment. The Regional Transit Initiative, which was about an 18-month study process that involved a lot of public involvement that went on in 1985 or 2005, mostly, but a little bit in 2004 and a little bit it concluded in 2005, so it was an 18-month period between 2004 and 2005. And there were a whole lot of local government folks that were involved in that, and some civic leaders and business leaders. It examined a wide range of alternative means of providing the additional $163 million of annual funding that will be required to build and operate the regional rail service. Options were evaluated against 6 principles or criteria that you can see listed on this chart. The general sales tax was found to be the preferred funding source. A rate of 1/2 cent is required to generate the revenue needed. The problem, of course, is that there isn't any legislative authority for local option sales tax beyond the 2 cents, and most communities in the region already have long-term commitments of their existing sales tax capacity. What our Tarrant Regional Transportation Coalition has recommended is that the legislature exempt from the local sales tax cap 1/2 cent of the sales tax levied for transit in non-attainment areas of the state. We're not the only region that's interested in this proposition, although it's vitally important to us. We think that legislatively is the means to get the authority to fund the system. If this occurred, then citizens through a local option election could choose, or choose not to, tax themselves to generate the funding required to provide regional rail service. Citizens who already tax themselves for transit could choose to levy a sales tax for economic development or crime control or property tax relief or any number of other purposes that are specified in the law today, which sort of provides a level playing field between the 4A, 4B cities and those that have used their sales tax capacity for transit. If we do not succeed in getting the needed legislative authority to implement regional rail service, there are consequences. We're going through right now the preparation of the 2030 plan. What we're showing you here is the 2025 plan. The plan has to be by federal law updated every 3 years. And what's going to happen is that some or all of those rail lines that are now a part of the plan will have to be removed, simply because in federal law there is something called a financially constrained provision, which means that you can't have things in the plan that you don't have reasonable likelihood of being able to have revenue to fund. Doing this would not only delay significantly any opportunity of improving mobility through the regional rail service, but would also compound our air quality challenges. It's questionable whether or not we could meet the emissions budget for conformity if we take those rail lines out. And every project that comes up has to pass a conformity analysis to show that it will not exceed the emissions budget for air quality. So this is a real important issue. The Regional Transit Initiative, the 18-month study I mentioned earlier, recommended that regional rail service be provided by the 3 existing transit operators, which of course are DART, DCTA, which is Denton County, and the T, Fort Worth T, and by one new agency that would encompass the balance of the urbanized area beyond the service area of the 3 existing transit operators. As you know, much of the growth occurring in the region is outside the service area of the existing transit providers, as you can tell by that map. Within 20 years, the population outside the transit service areas will exceed that inside the transit service areas. And by calling forth a new regional rail authority, we're not envisioning some new large bureaucracy, but more of a contracting agent that could contract with the existing 3 entities, and that would be the collection agency for the half-cent sales tax. It's not absolutely essential that occur. We could go ahead and have communities join one of the existing 3 transit authorities, but it is an alternative means, and it would discourage the proliferation of additional smaller entities forming, and that's something we'd like to guard against. The institutional structure for delivering the service isn't the critical issue right now. The taxing authority is. Here are the major components of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan in the left column. The middle column reflects the funding estimated to be available from current revenue sources over the 20-year period. And the column on the right reflects the needed funding for which no revenue sources have yet been identified. As you can see, we have, over the next 20 years, almost a $56 billion shortfall. If we want to implement needed capacity improvements and rehabilitate or replace worn-out infrastructure, then we need to identify ways to come up with an additional almost $56 billion over the next 20 years. And we need to do so in order to maintain mobility in this region. We just saw how the region will need nearly $101 billion over the next 20 years to adequately meet our transportation needs. That's $4.5 billion per year, which is a little more than 2.5 times the $1.7 billion that we currently have, that you can see the sources of on the slide before you. So, how are we going to fill this funding gap? Which we really need to do if we want to, again, rehabilitate aging infrastructure and add new capacity sufficient to eliminate those roadways that will be operating at bumper-to-bumper conditions much of the time. There are 5 things I'd like to suggest to you. We'll build tollways instead of freeways. Won't be pleasant, but it's a viable option we have. In some cases, we'll use what's called comprehensive development agreements to attract private sector capital. 588 decision to go find in House Bill 2702 this. We'll raise more capital through local bond programs, and we'll leverage these funds. As you know, on May 13th, there's a Tarrant County bond. One reason we push all of transportation resources construction. We're going through right now the preparation of the 2030 plan. What we're showing you here is the 2025 plan. The plan has to be by federal law updated every 3 years. And what's going to happen is that some or all of those rail lines that are now a part of the plan will have to be removed simply because in federal law there is something called a financially constrained provision, which means that you can't have things in the plan that you don't have reasonable likelihood of being able to have revenue to fund. Doing this would not only delay significantly any opportunity of improving mobility through the regional rail service, but would also compound our air quality challenges. It's questionable whether or not we could meet the emissions budget for conformity if we take those rail lines out. And every project that comes up has to pass a conformity analysis to show that it will not exceed the emissions budget for air quality. So this is a real important issue. The Regional Transit Initiative, the 18-month study I mentioned earlier, recommended that regional rail service be provided by the 3 existing transit operators, which of course are DART, DCTA, which is Denton County, and the T, Fort Worth T. And by one new agency that would encompass the balance of the urbanized area beyond the service area of the 3 existing transit operators. As you know, much of the growth occurring in the region is outside the service area of the existing transit providers, as you can tell by that map. Within 20 years, the population outside the transit service areas will exceed that inside the transit service areas. And by calling forth a new regional rail authority, we're not envisioning some new large bureaucracy, but more of a contracting agent that could contract with the existing 3 entities, and that would be the collection agency for the half-cent sales tax. It's not absolutely essential that that occur. We could go ahead and have communities join one of the existing 3 transit authorities, but it is an alternative means, and it would discourage the proliferation of additional smaller entities forming, and that's something we'd like to guard against. The institutional structure for delivering the service isn't the critical issue right now. The taxing authority is. Here are the major components of the Metropolitan Transportation Plan in the left column. The middle column reflects the funding estimated to be available from current revenue sources over the 20-year period. And the column on the right reflects the needed funding for which no revenue sources have yet been identified. As you can see, we have, over the next 20 years, almost a $56 billion shortfall. If we want to implement needed capacity improvements and rehabilitate or replace worn-out infrastructure, then we need to identify ways to come up with an additional almost $56 billion over the next 20 years. And we need to do so in order to maintain mobility in this region. We just saw how the region will need nearly $101 billion over the next 20 years to adequately meet our transportation needs. That's $4.5 billion per year, which is a little more than 2.5 times the $1.7 billion that we currently have that you can see the sources of on the slide before you. So, how are we going to fill this funding gap? Which we really need to do if we want to, again, rehabilitate aging infrastructure and add new capacity sufficient to eliminate those roadways that will be operating at bumper-to-bumper conditions much of the time. There are 5 things I'd like to suggest to you. We'll build tollways instead of freeways. Won't be pleasant, but it's a viable option we have. In some cases, we'll use what's called comprehensive development agreements to attract private sector capital. That's a new tool that the legislature provided in House Bill 3588 2 sessions ago and refined in House Bill 2702 this last session. We'll raise more capital through local bond programs, and we'll leverage those funds. As you know, on May 13th, there's a Tarrant County bond program, which I certainly hope you'll all go out and vote for. It has about $200 million in it for transportation improvements, and that can be leveraged into $800 to $900 million in transportation improvements. So that's an important strategy that we need to take advantage of. And we'll try to get a larger return of our federal and state gas tax dollars. Every 6 years, we lobby hard in Washington to try to improve the return of the federal gas tax, 18.4 cents a gallon on gasoline, and that we send to Washington. So we by law get 91.5% back now, and in the new law in the last couple of years, we'll get about 92% back. So we're gradually improving, but we ought to be getting 100% back. And state-wise, we probably get about 77%. In other words, we subsidize rural transportation in the state. So we're continually working on that battle. Lastly, we'll ask our state legislators to help us. We have 4 specific legislative strategies. One of the reasons we have a shortfall of transportation resources is that the legislature funds uses other than highway maintenance and construction with revenue from state highway user fees and taxes. For example, annual appropriations of state highway user fee and tax revenue to fund public education and the Department of Public Safety now exceeds $1.25 billion. We need to stop doing this. As you can see on this slide, Texas diverts nearly 35% of highway revenue to other uses. This is the 3rd highest rate of diversion of these resources in the country. In the 79th legislative session, which was the last session, House Transportation Committee Chairman Mike Cruzy filed House Bill 5, linking the motor fuel tax to the Consumer Price Index. Even Speaker Craddock supported this, but ultimately it died as a part of the tax fatigue associated with public school finance. The gas tax is one of the only state revenue sources that does not grow with the economy. Yet normal inflation certainly does regularly increase with the costs of roadway maintenance and construction that are funded by gas tax revenues. If House Bill 5 had passed, it would have raised the 20-cent motor fuel tax to 36 cents over 20 years and increased revenue by $27.3 billion. Another funding option is for the legislature to increase Texas Mobility Fund resources. The 78th legislature, 2 sessions ago, allocated $233 million annually to the Texas Mobility Fund from motor vehicle inspection fees, driver license fees, and driver record information fees, which had previously been allocated to the General Revenue Fund, part of that diversion thing I told you about earlier. So in the 80th session, we're going to ask them to do something like that again. And what you see here are some examples of highway user fees that currently go into the General Revenue Fund that should go into the Mobility Fund. We don't care if they pick these or some others as long as they get somewhere between 200 and 250 million in there, because by 2009, all of the revenue they put in there in the 78th session will be fully obligated and committed to debt service, so we won't get any more benefit from that until that debt is paid off. We believe that the legislature should empower metropolitan areas such as ours to levy a transportation tax subject to regional voter approval. That tax could be one of several, some of which are listed here: motor fuels excise tax, a general sales tax, motor vehicle sales tax, motor fuel sales tax, and or a motor vehicle registration fee. And we believe that the regional entity that submits this issue to the regional voters should be the one who decides what the particular form and the rate it wishes to ask its voters to approve are. So in summary, I've tried to show you that growth drives the need to invest more in our transportation system, that we're facing serious increases in our roadway congestion and associated delays that threaten our economy and quality of life, that we've got a good transportation plan. We know what to do to solve our problem, but that we need to invest more in transportation in order to implement it, that we need to identify and secure additional resources. So we've certainly got some big challenges ahead, but they're are by no means insurmountable. We need to start by educating folks about the gap between needs and resources, and by talking with our state legislators to encourage their support of our policy positions. And mostly the message we want to give them, other than these recommendations that I've outlined here, is simply that transportation is a high priority to us. One of the things that I've noticed over the years in lobbying in Austin is that sometimes legislators, when you're down there talking to them, will go to their file drawer to see if they've got any letters about this issue in their file from constituents, and frequently they don't. So we have a communications gap, and I think local elected officials and folks like myself need to do a better job of talking with them about what our priorities are, and this certainly needs to be one. With that, I'll be happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, Mr. Muir, do you have anything you want to add to this before I open the floor to members of the council for questions for Mr. Soon?
Yeah, thank you, Vic.
Sure.
I think some of the stuff that you've seen in this presentation, I think y'all have seen before, and I think the citizens may be seeing it for the first time. It's in a lot of ways, it's not very encouraging to a degree. That's accurate?
Fair statement.
But the funding source is a significant problem, and this is not a city issue. I wouldn't even say it's a county issue. You saw the regions that are there. It's a regional issue. It's something that we've all got to take ownership of. While we're certainly concerned with 820 and how it affects it, and in the design of that, we certainly want to work with the other surrounding cities as that comes along. But it's got to fit the whole puzzle of how transit works for this region, and the rail component, the highway component, the funding therein. They are no quick, easy fixes, and I'm not saying that there is, but this is certainly a regional issue that I think we need to keep in mind.
Okay, members of the council, any questions for either Mr. Muir or for Mr. Soom? Councilmember Bransom, followed by Councilmember Sutton.
Thank you. I'm not sure, probably your question.
Okay.
Let's see if I can ask it in a way that makes sense, because I don't know enough to ask it the right way.
All right.
But I've been reading in the paper that the railroads are also looking at diverting their lines around large metropolitan areas. Was
Right.
that taken into account when this study was done? And then the second part of that question is, are they funding that, which I mean raises our price of goods sold, but or is that a part of the tax?
The Texas Department, you've asked the question very well. I understand exactly what your question is. Let's see, let me take it in order.
As far as the rail, you're talking about Tower 55,
Yeah.
I think is what she's talking about.
I'm talking. What am I talking about?
Tower 55.
Yeah,
Tower 55.
that's exactly right. The problem, or the largest single problem that we have in this region is what's called Tower 55, which is in the southwest quadrant of the intersection of I-30 and I-35W.
Are you talking about Hewlin and Vickery?
No,
Oh, okay.
30 and 35. 30 and
Okay.
35.
The rail lines that are
Right,
located around
okay.
there.
Yeah, and you would.
That we pass over.
Yeah, if you drive by there sometime and look over in the southwest quadrant, you'll see a little about two-story tower there. That's what's
Right.
called Tower 55. It's the single most congested rail intersection in the western half of the United States, and what's happening is that more and more goods are coming into this country from Mexico and from Long Beach and Los Angeles, lots coming from China, but other places as well. And so, and this is going to get way worse real quick than it is right now. I happen to know some of the details about this in terms of what railroads are expecting in terms of increased volume, and it's pretty scary. To say that the plan that I've shown you here really takes into account what would happen if Tower 55 were resolved, I would say no, it doesn't. But the reason Tower 55 needs to be resolved, and whether or not that's actually moving those lines, in the case of the BNSF line out to the west, and in the case of the UP line down to the south, which is a part of a recommendation from our metropolitan planning organization here, or whether there's a grade separation built at that track, remains to be seen. There was an earmark in the federal transportation bill that was passed recently to, I think it was $1.6 million to do a study to find out.
How much?
$1.6 million, I think, to do a study to find out what the best solution to that congestion problem is. And that's just beginning right now. But the legislature last session passed a bill to provide for a new rail relocation fund, and it was subject to constitutional amendment, and it was amended by the voters in November. So TxDOT has initiated a consultant study to figure out how best to fund that. In all likelihood, it will be funded by fees on shippers, and so it will affect you and I when we go buy goods.
Well, right.
I don't
Well,
think
and
there's any doubt about that.
I thought part of the goal was to get some of the keep some of the trucks, that they were going to use the lines as opposed to the big trucks coming through the areas.
In terms of how we think of regional mobility or even state mobility, a big part of the effort, of course, is to be able to move some of the freight from trucks to rails. But if you have major clogs in the rail system, you can't do that. And so this proposal that was made about a week or week and a half ago by a consortium called Centra Zachary that's doing the TTC 35 part of the Trans-Texas Corridor project. And if I'm talking about stuff you don't know anything about and you want to know more about it, I'll be happy to explain as much as you like.
I have no clue what project that is. But
What he's referring to is not included in this. The Trans-Texas Corridor is a project by TxDOT that is trying to come up with specialized lanes for truck traffic. It's a line that's going to run parallel to 35, and you've seen it it was in the news last week as far as what they were recommending was going around to the east around Dallas.
and see, my mind was going from the valley,
Well,
the
actually,
other line that they were trying to do for the trucks.
But
Well,
part of
it does. This is a 600-mile rail line that goes from Mexico to Oklahoma. Well, I guess right now it's only going to go as far as Dallas-Fort Worth, but it does include, and this is like a $5 to $6 billion investment. This is a big investment. This is a huge investment, and it will involve fixing Tower 55, whether it does it by grade separation or whether it does it by moving lines to the west and the south. And that will enable movement of goods from trucks to trains. Not all of them, but some. It will relieve traffic. And this TTC 35 is a project that will, as Tom said, parallel 35 between Laredo and Oklahoma.
Well, and is it supposed to happen close to the same? I mean, if they don't happen close together, I don't see how it's going to help a whole lot.
There's certainly going to have to be some planning and coordination.
Yeah.
Amongst it.
So are the railroads the ones that are going, or I know you said
No,
federal
TxDOT,
transportation.
the Texas Department of Transportation will do it, but they have selected a private investment team that has pledged $6 billion to invest in the TTC 35 project, or the parallel roadway to 35, and also an additional $1.2 billion to do connectors to that. But since that time, and there wasn't any real rail component in that, since that time, and just really about a week and a half ago, the Centra Zachary team offered a new proposal to parallel that one that involves an additional $6 billion in just these rail improvements. And the rail improvements are mostly in our region on the west and the south.
Okay, thanks, that helped.
Probably a little more long-winded explanation than you wanted, but
Councilmember Sutton.
Thanks, Mayor. As I understand the regional mobility problem, it's multi-part. One is that we're smack dab in the middle of where goods are being shipped from Mexico up through the rest of the continental United States.
yeah.
The other is a regional mobility problem that we have with transportation to just getting to our jobs and our shopping centers and
Yeah.
things like that, and they're kind of intermingling. The Trans-Texas Corridor was meant to hopefully give us some alleviation from that, the shipment of goods up through here. And I heard on the radio about the rail component just a few days ago that was added, and that may just solve our rail component problem. The question I have for you is that rail for passengers, I'm being very specific here, not for shipment of goods, but rail for passengers
Right.
is usually predicated upon density studies because it doesn't become economical until there's a certain density and also a aggregation of businesses and things that make it work. Are those studies going to be made public so that our city, our manager can look at them?
Yeah, there, as I said, COG it's been about 2 years ago now, completed a $1.8 billion study to look at those very kinds of issues associated with what's called the Regional Rail Plan, which was one of the slides that I showed you there. And I believe one of the lines comes through Haltom City. I'm pretty sure it does. But yes, they looked at things like where are existing lines now that could be used for passenger rail, because it's much, much, much less expensive to use those than it is to go out and buy new right-of-way and build new rail, of course.
Right.
And they looked at where the ridership is. So they did some very extensive studies, and that information is certainly available over at the Council of Governments.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Muir,
Well, if you'd like me to provide that for you, and it's some of these maps, I know one or two of the maps that you've had on there I've provided before, and I can certainly provide those again.
I guess I'm
provide some
fishing for
updates
a
to
little
it.
bit more detail than we've had up to this point. I've seen some of the maps that he's talking about, and I feel like there's a little bit more significant need for the density studies that I'm...
You're looking for the numbers that support the maps.
Right.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And that's something I have not provided, but I'll see
Okay.
what I can do.
All right, thanks.
I have a question or comment for Mr. Soon. Let me just make a comment, and then I'll ask a question.
Okay.
I've had the privilege of sitting in the Tarrant County Regional Transportation meetings
Sure have.
once a month for 2 or 3 hours sometime for the last 2 to 3 years that this discussion. So what has been presented tonight is just a very brief synopsis of all of the discussion. Tremendous time and energy and research and planning and vision casting and all of that by local, state, national individuals has been at play. The point that's being made is that this region will double in size in the next 20 years.
Oh, yeah.
Our infrastructure to move people cannot accommodate that. We have a major problem on our hand in the north central Texas region with regard to mobility. And with the solution to that problem, there are billions of dollars needed. Where will that come from? And you saw some of the possibilities, and the legislature is going to be looking at that with this next session. Now, how that comes to play for us here tonight, Mr. Muir, and you might talk a little bit about that. I believe there are going to be some public hearings conducted that we'll have an opportunity to have input into the process. And you want to talk about that, or Mr.
Sure.
Soom?
Let me address it, and you can fill in the holes.
Sure.
I'd rather have you fill in my holes instead of me trying to fill in your holes. As I stated earlier, the TxDOT is going to be dealing with the 820 project on, and then it'll be on April 27th. As far as the rail component, and Vic alluded to it earlier in his presentation as far as how to fund that. There's a lot of people that want the rail component for commuter rail. Everybody wants it, just no way to pay for it. And the extra half cent to the sales tax is an important issue, because we're not asking the legislature to give us a half cent. We're asking the legislature to give the citizens an option to consider that. And that we're getting some resistance from that. We've met several times with our state elected officials, and they're resistant to that. I think now that what they're wanting to do, we can't do a non-binding referendum election to see if the citizens want to do that. So what they're going to do now is do surveys. They're going to do a phone survey to the region to see see if there's enough input, and apparently the representatives and the senators are going to take that as whether they want to pursue this or not, expanding the sales tax. But expanding the sales tax has been taboo. That's probably putting it very mildly. They have avoided it desperately, and part of that is because of school finance. They're trying to deal with that as well. So they're not wanting to do with that. So as far as our ability to input, you may be asked to participate in a survey regarding that. And I think hopefully, if any of our citizens got those calls, they would take the time to participate in that thing. As far as the rail goes, there's certainly the rail issues that were mentioned on that map certainly affect Haltom City. We saw one that dissects through our city. We've got a proposed property site to where we could possibly put a rail station there, so that'll help. But there's other areas in the region that aren't going to be fully suited with that because there's not currently rail there. And Vic alluded to that earlier. One of that makes it more economical is that the lines that are already in place, the line that comes through Haltom City, the Cotton Belt line, is owned by DART. DART's certainly a major player in this whole thing, so that's a given there. But there's in other meetings recently, Mansfield has stated their concern. Mansfield is projected to be the third largest city in the county. Mansfield is not anywhere on that rail line because of the ability of commuter rail in that community is going to be very, very costly. So it's, at least in this first phase, if you want to call it, looks like it's probably going to be several phases. It just didn't work out. Now, Mansfield, I can certainly see why Mansfield wants to have that with the huge growth they're going to have. Something needs to be done there, but to do that is going to be a huge cost, much more significant cost than what it's going to affect the people in the north end of the county. So people have to decide whether they're going to, what kind of resources they're wanting to commit to that, if any. And I certainly see Mansfield's point, but there's as far as the citizens go, they're elected officials. As far as from a state level, here we've Dr. Griggs is the state representative. The state senator would be Jane Nelson. Any input that those folks, our citizens, would have with those individuals? Well, Kelly Hancock still has an election to win in November, but Dr. Griggs is currently technically the representative. But there's I think our citizens commenting with those folks, they need to keep those communications there with them, and they'll certainly relay that to their colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Vic, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, that's pretty accurate. I mean, Tom was right on. The Mansfield thing. As I said, we can't put in the next 20 years enough rail lines to serve all 40 plus communities in Tarrant County. It's just not affordable. So we had to start with a system that utilized the existing facilities to the maximum extent possible and blend that with where the most ridership would be. That's not to say that Mansfield doesn't need to be served by rail at some point, but we need to do what we can do with getting this thing started first.
Yeah, and I only mentioned Mansfield. There's other considerations that weren't referenced on that map that they're certainly going to weigh heavily. That's the only reason I mentioned that. I'm not.
Yeah, but that's an important point. I mean, that's a big issue. Mm-hmm. It is.
But this is a region. It's not a city by city issue.
Yeah.
In my opinion, this is a region wide issue, not just a city by city issue.
Well, we've spent a great deal of time tonight with this presentation. and rightly so, because this is extremely important, and we're going to be hearing a lot more regarding transportation over the next few weeks and months and years. And the first opportunity to address the Texas Department of Transportation on the Loop 820 thing is April 27th, and where will that be?
That'll be at the Richland Hills First Baptist or Church of Christ? Church of Christ? Church of Christ on 820. Okay. And Meadow Lakes Drive, I think, or Ironhorse Boulevard. I can't remember what street they changed the name to.
Okay. So while this has been a little bit tedious tonight, and thank all of you in the audience and those who are watching on TV for your patience as we've gone through this, please understand this is an extremely important issue that we're going to be visiting again and again and again over the next 20 years in this area. And there's a lot of tough decisions to be made by people on all levels within the state on how to address these issues. But for now, hopefully this has given you an overview of the larger area of the north central Texas transportation needs and where we're headed, and some of the dollars attached on how we're going to get there, and then now finding funding sources for that. I believe there are no lights on. Mr. Muir, do you have any final thing you'd like to?
I just wanted to thank Vic for his time. I know this
pleasure.
was
Thank you.
an imposition, but I appreciate you taking the time.
I'm happy to do it anytime.
Mr. Zoom, anything final you'd like to say to the citizens tonight before we go? Well, we do
Thanks
appreciate
for listening. I appreciate your attention. I really
we do appreciate you being here. Sure. The information is extremely important. Great. And thank you.
Thank you.
We move now to the consent agenda consisting of items number 1, 2, 3, and 4. This will be taken by one action by the council and acted by the council with one motion, Item number 1 has to do with minutes of the previous council meeting. Item number 2, 2006 Justice Assistance Grant Interlocal Agreement. Item number 3 having to do with a proposal by Atmos Energy Corporation. We're being asked to suspend what they're asking for to implement an interim GRIP rate adjustment. And item number 4, the Tarrant County Housing Finance Corporation, having to do with granting approval of that Tarrant County Housing Finance Corporation's use of proceeds of its Series 2006 single-family mortgage revenue bonds to finance home mortgages for single-family homes located within not only this city but throughout the county. So, members of the council, I'm in line for a motion regarding your pleasure on the consent agenda. Councilmember Reese, followed by Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve the consent agenda items 1 through 4.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a second.
I have a motion and a second to approve. If you will register your vote at this time, please, I will display it. It is a unanimous vote to approve the consent agenda. Item number 5 is a public hearing. Well, it's under public hearing. It's not a public hearing. It's public hearing ordinance resolution. It is an ordinance. Mr. Muir, you want to introduce this or introduce the one?
I'll introduce our Finance Director, Joel Welsh, who will brief the council and the citizens on this ordinance.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Enclosed in your packet is an ordinance that the impact of which is to temporarily suspend a portion of the Haltom City Code that pertains to winter re-averaging of sewer bills. Under our current code specifications, each year we take the water readings, the water sales for each customer, residential customer. For December, January, and February, we average those water sales, and that is considered to be the normal sewer usage for billing customers for sewer bills the rest of the year until the next re-averaging. This past year, we had noted large water sales, unseasonable water sales, and I'd been reporting this to the council over the time frame in which they were occurring. And we began to be a little concerned about the impact this may have on residential sewer bills. And so we began watching very carefully the bills from Fort Worth Water Department for the wastewater flows, because they meter the water coming into the city, they meter the wastewater leaving. And of course, we were finding much higher flows coming into the city, and we were selling a great deal more water. We also found that the flows leaving the city were actually a little bit less than last year. We ran the re-averaging as a test project to see what the impact would be. We found that the impact on customers' wastewater bills was going to range from a low of about 6.5% increase to a high of almost 16% increase in their bills. And as I mentioned, this was inconsistent with what we were seeing in the flows out of the city. So we sought legal advice on what we could do about this, and they advised us to bring an ordinance to the council, asking the council to suspend just for this year the part of the code that requires us to re-average, and because of the effect it would have on customers' bills. And the staff's position on this and seeking this was that since the customer paid for the water when they bought it, but they used it for more than likely watering grass, watering foundations, and other such things, and it never entered the sewer system, so it just didn't seem to be appropriate to increase their sewer bill for the rest of the year for flows that just didn't go in the sewer. One other thing I want to mention in relation to this is that should the council decide to take this action, it has been customary that we notified customers whenever a re-averaging was done that they would have until the end of April to request a review. Under this circumstance, if the council decides to approve this ordinance, I know this is the first reading. After the second reading, we would be letting customers know that they would have until the end of May to request a review of their sewer bill, and this would be for customers that fit in two groups. If you're a customer that moved into the city during last year, after the last re-averaging, the code prescribes that you'll pay a sewer bill based upon 5,000 gallons per month. Well, some of our customers may want to pursue a review of that with us because, in fact, their actual usage may be below 5,000 gallons a month. And of course, then we have the other case where a customer's made a concerted effort to keep their sewer readings low during those 3 months in order to hopefully take advantage of the opportunity in the system to have a low sewer bill. And so we've always extended this opportunity, but we've always extended it just to the end of April. And I would be proposing that we extend that to the end of May to allow people to have an opportunity for a review.
Couple of questions for you before I open it to the council. And how will our citizens be notified of that option to request a review of their individual account?
Be a comment on their bill for sure, and then just about any other means that we have at our disposal, the web page. If there would be an issue of the newsletter, which I don't know that there is in that time frame, but definitely there'll be a comment on their bill.
Okay, and the other thing, I'm average citizen out in the community. If the council approves the recommendation of the first reading of this ordinance, will my water bill, the sewer part of it, will it go up or down?
If this ordinance is approved, your sewer bill will be the same. It won't go up or down.
Where normally it would.
If this action is not taken, depending upon the class of customer, and I use class, basically the lower socioeconomic customers in our town, on average, our analysis indicated that their sewer bill would go up 6.5%. In some of the higher socioeconomic parts of town, their bills could go up as high as nearly 16%, about 15.7%, and that would happen with the next billing and would continue at that higher rate until the next re-average.
Okay, what you've just said is if this is not approved, this would happen.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Muir?
Well, I was just going to reiterate that the actions that he's talking about were going to happen. The increases are already in place. They haven't been taken effect yet, but the current ordinance already allows for the increase to take place. So if this ordinance is not passed, then the respective sewer rates would go up anywhere from 6 to 16%.
Yes, sir, that is correct. It will happen unless we do this.
Members of the council, any questions for Mr. Welch before I call for a motion? Councilmember Clark?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Aren't other cities looking at this same type
Yes, sir.
situation?
Yes, sir. A number of cities have already passed measures. Colleyville, North Richland Hills, Hearst, to name three just very close to us. But all over the Metroplex, a number of cities have already taken this action. These are cities that are on winter re-averaging like we are.
Councilmember Hutchison?
Yes, Mr. Welsh, if we undergo another unseasonable type winter next year and we have the same thing happen, we have the option because of this temporary ordinance to exercise yet another temporary ordinance again next year if this same thing happens. Is that correct?
If we ran into the same problem again next time we re-average that we have this time, I certainly hope not, but we would be able to come back to the council with another ordinance like this one to temporarily suspend, because this is only effective this year and this time, so we have that option available to us next year if we need it.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay, there being none, what is the pleasure of the council regarding item number 5? Councilmember Sutton, followed by Councilmember Holcomb.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move to approve ordinance number O-2006-004-03.
Okay, Councilmember Holcomb.
Thank you, Mayor. Second.
Have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, if you will, register your vote. And display it showing the vote was unanimous in favor of. Now remember, this is the first reading of an ordinance. We'll have the second and final reading at the next council meeting. The next section of our meeting tonight is the Visitor Citizens Forum. This time is set aside for any person having business before the city that is not scheduled on the agenda to have an opportunity to speak to the council. All comments made during this time period must be directed toward myself, the presiding officer, rather than to an individual council member or staff. Each speaker must limit his or her comments to the subject matter they listed on the speaker's request form and must refrain from personal attacks toward any individual. Those who have filled out the speaker's request form will be granted a 6-minute time limit. If after I believe we have 3 who have filled out speaker's request forms, other members of the audience will have an opportunity to address the council, but without having filled one of these out, the time limit will be 3 minutes. Council cannot discuss or debate any issue brought forth at this time, nor can any formal action be taken by the council, since this items that are brought forth during this portion of our meeting were not posted agenda items in accordance with the open meetings law. Having said that, our first speaker's request form, Mr. John Williams. Mr. Williams, if you will come forward, give us your name and address for the record, please. And you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor. John Williams, 4609 Biscayne, Haltom City. Thanks for the opportunity to come and visit with y'all. Saturday afternoon, about 3:45, a real good friend of mine, his wife called, and he had experienced some problems. A couple of minutes from my business, so I hopped in the car and went over there. And by the time I got to him, he started deteriorating in his condition. I administered what first aid I knew for the conditions he had, and I told his wife at that time I thought we needed to call the fire department. At that time, we did call the Haltom City Fire Department. They dispatched an apparatus out of Station 1, and response time was a little under 4 minutes, which is very good for a piece of equipment as big as what they came out in. 4 firefighters automatically went to work on this gentleman, and in a matter of about 5 or 10 minutes, they decided that his condition needed to be where he would be hospitalized. Ambulance was called at that time, and just short of 15 minutes later, MedStar arrived on the scene. The firefighters had him stabilized. At that time, they decided they needed to take him to the hospital. I guess sometime in between when the ambulance got there, when they carried him on to the hospital, they didn't run under code or anything because two of his friends were waiting at the hospital for the ambulance, and we stopped a couple of times on the way to wait for the ambulance. It's my understanding the ambulance had to come out of downtown Fort Worth. I do not know the reason for that, but I do know that I think 15 minutes for an ambulance response time is not acceptable. I spoke with a couple of ambulance drivers, with your assistant city manager's former city out there. They tell me their average response time is 3 to 6 minutes. Said if that response time was over 6 minutes, their city manager and fire chief took a great interest in it. I think our city manager and fire chief should take a great interest, as long as the council as well. We have a lot of elderly people in this city. I got here during y'all's work session earlier. I wasn't aware of the gang problem y'all were talking about. I don't watch TV, and as y'all know, I haven't been up here in a while, so I really don't know anything that's going on that. But with these gang problems, Mayor, you said there was 20 rounds found down there by your house. If one or two of those rounds had went into a person, and it took 15 minutes for the ambulance to get there, not count transporting that person to the hospital, it could be fatal. I would like to have this plan looked at. The person that went to the hospital wasn't aware what an ambulance ride would cost. And when they found out how much ambulance ride would cost and found out there is a policy that you can buy through MedStar to save you a considerable amount of money on that, the correspondence there, and this person should actually knew that there was a plan that you could buy. But I think the city should look at trying to implement a plan to advertise the ambulance service. First of all, get it upgraded where it is a good ambulance service, because it's hard to sell a product that's not good. But the library, I understand it's getting close to being a new library. It's been on the back burner, I think, for about 2 years. Looking at $4 million was appropriated for it. With inflation, I think it'd be fair to say that we're going to get about 70% of the library that we originally bargained for. So that 30% loss on that library would have bought those ambulances that we need here. So I would like to charge the council and the mayor. I'll take this time to thank you for the time you served the city. And I hate to see you go. I don't know who I'll bother now. But the rest of you, I think, Bill, you're probably the only one that's going to be up for election. I did that through you to him. I didn't go directly to Bill. But
Mr. Williams, pardon me just for a moment. I had mentioned earlier that each speaker must limit his comments to the subject matter listed on the speaker's request form, and I did
bars
not.
in Haltom City.
And I did not make the statement of what you had asked to speak on, and you
Go
haven't
ahead.
spoke on anything yet.
You go ahead and take away.
Haltom City Bars.
Haltom City Bars.
And you have 1 minute and 19 seconds of your time remaining.
Well, the reason I'm
for that
glad you
subject.
brought up the Haltom City Bars, because we talked about raising the bars when you ran for your terms and stuff, and each of you council members. And I think it's time we got to the bars, not the ones you drink at, but the bars we've talked about raising. And with our age of our citizenry, we need to do something about the ambulance deal. Not 2 years from now, not 3 years from now, but we need to start immediately. Thank you for your time. How much time do I have left?
50 seconds. I do want to repeat, and that was my failure to say what the subject matter for Mr. Williams' comments were. It was to be Haltom City Bars, so most of what had I made the statement of what it was about, most of what he talked about tonight would have not fallen in line with that, but the subject matter that has been spoken is important for us to hear. Mr. Bill Journay is our next speaker, and I will mention this time, I will not overlook quality of life, standard of living. And you will be limited to comments regarding that subject.
Very well. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Quality of life and standard of living for the proud and progressive among us. First, I think we should deal with the obvious, the prevalent issues in our cities and others. Believe it or not, horse thieves, slavery, gambling, prostitution, and even snake oil sales is quite prevalent anymore. Well, it always has been. Horse thieves in the form of towing cars, slavery in the form of illegal immigration, gambling in the form of insurance and health care, prostitution in the form of outsourcing responsibilities while our streets and parks go unattended, insurance mandates, arbitrates, and even mediates our traffic laws, snake oil in the form of quality, quote, education, utility prices, even gasoline. It shouldn't surprise anyone that our cities are truly concerned about quality of life and standard of living, but it seems it's only for those in government, business, commerce, money, ours becoming theirs. Or what exactly are you doing about horse thieves, slavery, gambling, prostitution, and the flim-flam man snake oil, such as the transportation issue? Or is it true the purification of politics is indeed an iridescent dream? It seems as if the only ones really enjoying this standard of living and quality of life are those at the top. And if you consider yourself a Christian individual at all and can decipher the Lord's parables, you shouldn't have much problem understanding a guy like me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Journay. Our final speaker's request form was submitted tonight by Mr. Henry Wright. Mr. Wright wishes to speak to us on the subject of the Buffalo Ridge Park. So, Mr. Wright, if you will give us your address for the record, you have 6 minutes.
Henry Wright, 5076 San Jacinto. Mayor, council, and staff, I want to say thank you for letting me speak tonight. First thing I'd like to start off with, I live, as a lot of you know, there at my property backs up to the Buffalo Ridge Park at Big Fossil. The part of it that the Park and Recreation Department is responsible for, the mowing, the trimming, they have done an outstanding job, and I think they should be commended for it. I won't talk about the rest of it. One of the things up there about a year ago when they did the work on the creek to start with, and we'll just say they spent money on it. The creek was in great shape. It was down to the rock. We had beautiful. The kids could go down and hunt rocks. They could fish. They could do different things. When they dumped all these hundreds of loads of dirt on both sides of the creek, the rains came and washed it in the bottom. All we have now is a mud hole. But I want to get off of that subject and talk about when they did do the creek work, all of our trees were cut down. We were told they would be replaced. This was a couple of administrations ago. About a year ago, we had a young man here that was the city secretary's son that had a program to get his Eagle Scout, and we planted 9 trees. I don't know whether he was ever commended for that or not, but he should have been by this council. The trees that time were, some of them were furnished by the park department, by the beautification board, and some private money. They were planted there by the scouts, the park personnel. We had some volunteers, local, the residents up there. We had the beautification board, had some people up there working, and even the mayor was up there working. And if you need anything done in the yard, he's pretty good at digging holes for trees, I'll tell you. But at this time, those trees now are doing well. They're doing real good. Recently, the park department came in and planted about, I didn't count them today, 10 or 12 more trees along the banks. They're doing well. They're leaved out. They're looking good. We need a lot more. We need a lot more work up there. And you as the council is where we've got to depend on trying to get this done. One of the things I'm talking about, I would like to see some of the money that we receive from the hotel motel tax allotted for this park work. That's what the money was meant for to start with. Now, the trees up there that we have, it's probably covered about half of it. This park up there, Buffalo Ridge Park, gets very little attention. We're north of 820. We realize that. Most people don't even know they're in Haltom City up there, and a lot of them don't care. But the other thing is that I think years to come, when these trees are all grown, they're going around that park, people look back and say, look how nice this walking trail is. Look what Haltom City did. We have a chance up there to make something that is real attractive and beautiful for Haltom City, and we need it. We up there right now, if you count people, like I've counted over 200 people some days, particularly when schools are in session, using that trail. Mothers with their babies in little carts, bicycles, you name it, they're all up there. But what I'm asking tonight is that we have a good start. I would like to see that you, the council, help us to finish this program up there. We need better lighting. The lighting is terrible, particularly in the park area. During the days you go down there, there's a lot of the people that have their babies, their small children during the day, playing in that park. We've had very little improvements in that park ever since it was built. We did get the benches replaced in the area that was stolen about 2 years ago. We finally got some of those replaced. We have no chairs. We have, as far as I can tell right now, I went around, we have one park bench and table in the whole park outside of the pavilion. Look around Haltom Road Park. Quite a few of them down there, aren't you? We're part of Haltom City too. Up there we have, this area is a new area, mostly younger people. A big portion of your ad valorem taxes comes from that area. So we have very few people that get the senior exemptions. We have a lot of business taxes that come off of Beach Street.
Mr. Williams, you have, Mr. Wright, you have 30 seconds.
Beach Street. We have a lot of from Western Center. As y'all are aware of recently, when the tax dollars came in, you received several million, I believe, whatever, from people that didn't even know this in Haltom City. They sent the money to Fort Worth. It's time that we recognize that people north of 820 are part of Haltom City.
Mr. Wright, your time is up. If you will, go ahead and wrap it up. Take another 10, 15 seconds.
It's up to you to help us do these things, and we want to do them, and any help that you could give us, we certainly would appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your comments before the council tonight. Do we have anyone else in the audience who wishes to address the council who might not have filled out one of the speaker's request forms? Okay, there being none, we'll go ahead and move to item number 6, resignation of board members. And Council Member Lanford, I believe you have a resignation tonight.
Yes, Mayor White, thank you. Have a resignation here from Jody Allen. She's resigning from the, I believe it's the Parks Board. And I want to thank Jody for her service. She and Scott recently gave his resignation from the Planning and Zoning, and I think he'd been on there close to 6 years. 6 years. I know it'd been quite a while that he served on there, and just want to thank both he and Jody for their service to Haltom City, and wish them well, and like for us to accept Jody's resignation tonight.
Okay, Councilmember Lanford's announced this resignation. I need a vote from members of the council regarding ratification of this resignation, please. And the council ratifies that resignation by unanimous vote, and we come now to appointments and reappointments to boards and commissions. And Councilmember Lanford, while you have the floor, I believe you have an appointment to make tonight.
Yes, Mayor White, I'd like to appoint Al Mata to the Charter Review Board.
Okay, we have a recommendation of Mr. Mata. What is your pleasure regarding ratification of that appointment? It is a unanimous appointment. I have an appointment to the Charter Review. Ms. Sharon Milius. I'm asking for ratification at this time, please. And that is a unanimous vote as well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here on the dais, as well as those in the audience and those who are watching, we now have come to the end of the agenda. We have no executive session items to discuss. That being the case, all items having been addressed, we stand adjourned.